this terrific book, and John, your work in general is almost zero. So let's start briefly. John, the warmest of welcomes. Thank you so much. I don't think you need any introduction here, but you are the BBC editor for North America. How are you doing? How do we find you on this crisp February afternoon?
I'm very well. I'm actually in London, very, very rarely. So I got the hottest invitation in town from the National Health Service to have my jab. And so I came back, did my quarantine, got my jab, met a very nice woman at the Fleet Road Rec who said, oh, I'm watching you on Sunday at the Masorti Judaism event. So if you're there, hello, and thank you for everything you did, at Fleet Road and helping to get everybody vaccinated.
Well, if we're going to play a little bit of sort of Jewish geography, I have to pass on to you my dad and my stepmom's warmest regards. They're huge fans of Americast, bigger fans than me, which is only saying a small amount. It's a terrific podcast that you co-present with Emily Maitlis, and obviously you are the voice and the journalist of lead over what's been an extraordinary coming on 5-6 years in America, and particularly this last year. So this is your third book, Unprecedented. Just introduce it for us, if you would.
So my publisher came to me. I mean, I've now written a third book about being in America, and largely about Trump. I mean, when I went to America.
John, you've just gone on mute, I'm afraid.
What happened? I was unmuted and something muted me. This is the third book I've written since I've been in the States. And when I went there, I could barely write my name. And I now seem to have written 3 books on Donald Trump. It has been a phenomenal 3 years. And my publisher said, why don't you do a diary of the election? And someone's talking. Someone else is unmuted. And so what happened was that it was going to... Oh... I don't know why something's muting me. Anyway, it was going to be a diary of the election, and then everything turned very different, as your film just indicated. The world was turned upside down by COVID. My family life was turned upside down by COVID because I was in America. My wife had moved back to London to look after her elderly mother. My son lives in Australia, and we could no longer get to each other. And this sense of dislocation was very powerful. And so I couldn't write a diary of the year of covering the election without covering that as well. And so I suspect it is a more personal account than I originally intended, but an extraordinary election because of COVID, because of an economic shutdown, because of Black Lives Matter. And they all came together and they all fed off each other in a very dramatic way. And it led to a bitterly contested election. And it led to a lot of upset, anger, resentment that is still there, still polarizing and dividing America today.
And I think you take us through that brilliantly. I mean, I enjoyed the book enormously. In part, it's a chance to relive these extraordinary moments. They came through so fast and so furious that you need to be reminded that there was an occasion when the president of the United States suggested it's sort of injecting people with bleach, and just like this slew of other issues, any one of which in a normal campaign would have been extraordinary. As you kind of looked back over that kind of rat-a-tat-tat of shattering news, how do you kind of catch your breath as a journalist who's provided that day-to-day coverage as you look back over the course of a year?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question because it's very hard to catch your breath because things are coming at you the whole time. It's like you're playing a game of Tetris where it's really, really fast and you're kind of trying to move and try and stay on top of everything. And it's very difficult. And this is probably not an appropriate metaphor, but for 4 years, I feel I've been, smoking crack cocaine daily. And now that Joe Biden's president, I feel I've gone over to half a lemonade shandy. And that is the difference in pace and relentlessness that you're moving at. And I think you've got to try and keep a balance and keep a sense of perspective. And am I just a dog chasing after a ball? Or have I got a sense of strategy of what matters here? And I try in the book to keep a focus on what matters. And that's sort of one of the things that I wanted to do so that you're not just saying today I woke up and I had cornflakes. you're saying today I woke up and this happened, and that's significant because of that. And in the course of writing a diary, there are some things I get painfully wrong. If you read my early entries about Joe Biden and what he looks like, I'm not exactly flattering, and I don't give the impression that I think he's the next man who could be president. But there are some things that, I think 3 months out from the election, I am saying Donald Trump is not going to accept defeat. And he could only conceive of two possible outcomes of the election. And one is that he wins, and the other is that there is fraud and it is stolen from him. And that narrative from him has remained absolutely consistent, even though there is no evidence of fraud. And all the respective bodies in America, like the courts, like the election officers, they have certified the results and they have said there was no fraud.
I mean, what I want to do in the time that we have together, we're going to spend a bit of time talking kind of politics, and I'll kind of nudge it in a slightly Jewish direction, if I may, and then we'll come to this other thing that you were just talking about before, when you were talking about the very personal nature of the thing called a diary, even bearing in mind this very this very auspicious position that you hold in political discourse. So let's start with the politics. I remember getting the book. It arrived from your publishers. Thank you very much. And I opened it, and in my mind was, what shall I find to engage you with at a kind of Masorti Judaism event? And there on the very first page, you're vox popping someone at a big Trump rally, and the person says of Trump that he is Jesus-like. And so we kind of enter into a world of leadership, messianic pretensions, kind of religion and politics. Let's maybe start with the character of Trump. What is it that you think led people to see in Trump something Jesus-like?
Well, yeah, I have to say that my mental picture of Jesus and my mental picture of Donald Trump, they're not quite the same person that I have in mind. But it was amazing the extent to which people thought that Donald Trump was this hero figure. He was different from all the 44 presidents that had preceded him in so many ways. He was a reality TV star who'd never run for elected office. I remember, and kind of going with the Jesus light, I remember, God plays a much more important role in American politics than it does in UK, which is really odd because we have an established church in the UK, and America has a separation of powers where the church should play no role, or religion should play no role. And yet religion plays a role in everything. And, so you start off, I'm sure people have heard of the Iowa caucuses, which is the kickoff event for an election season. And what happens is that you have to go to a Bible breakfast, and you will talk about your faith and the role that Jesus plays in your life in a way that you would be considered a crank if you were running to be prime minister. If you were leader of the Conservative Party or the Labour Party, then Tony Blair was deeply religious and would go to church every Sunday. But the last thing in the world he ever wanted to do was talk about it. And I remember Donald Trump being asked, so what's your favourite? Old Testament or New? And he goes, well, kind of like them both. Your favourite biblical passage? There are so many good ones, and you just got the impression, I don't think he studied the Bible that closely, actually.
I mean, there is that wonderful moment, and you take us through it. There's been some, Antifa kind of action, and Donald Trump just strides out and stands outside the major cathedral in Washington holding a Bible. But as you say, and you quote the minister of that church, he's not giving a religious message. He's just aping the structures of religious power in his own support.
Yeah, and it was, I actually think it did him huge amounts of harm and was deeply damaging to him. I don't think that, I think that, it was interesting in the campaign that Trump never referred to that moment. It was a huge miscalculation of Trump looking sort of this strong man outside a church, and he was actually holding the Bible upside down at one stage, which kind of all added to this sort of metaphor of, so why people found him Jesus-like was extraordinary. It was white evangelicals mainly. And just imagine for a moment, I put this thought into your head and I don't make any comment on it, but the narrative, what would the narrative have been? if it was Barack Obama, who was married 3 times and had 5 children, a black man who'd been married 3 times and had 5 children, would he have been considered Jesus-like by the white evangelicals? I'm going to say not so much. But Donald Trump was seen as this figure who was disruptive, who was going to disrupt the status quo of Washington politics. And I just saw on my iPhone, just before our conversation started, the excerpts of the first speech he's going to give. Later.
We come to that. I'd love to end with that, because it's an extraordinary day to work out what the next cycle is going to look like. Let me just pull it back into this thing. And I don't mean to be rude about Christianity. I think Christianity is an extraordinary religion full of, a tremendous possibility of holiness, but there's something about a messianic pretension. And as Jews, we feel we've seen this through time, of someone who says, invest in me, all your concerns, and I shall solve your problems. And that opens a relationship between a kind of a messianism, from a Jewish perspective, a false messianism, and the very, very dangerous world of autocratism and even dictatorship. And there seems to be a sort of a slight slide in this sort of religious fervor for Trump, and Trump's willingness to sort of hold that I can solve all your problems if only you are on my side thing, and the fear that so many people had, and I'm among them, that this was a moment when America could have gone in a much more dictatorial direction than ended up happening in that last election.
That's such a good point, Rabbi Jeremy. Look, I was at that Trump rally where he said he was Jesus-like. There was a slight twinkle in his eye as he said it. The people who loved Trump in the early days were people who knew that he was not entirely truthful in his tax returns, and probably not entirely truthful in the way that he dealt with his wives, and that there were all sorts of areas where he cut corners. He was a TV celebrity. He was a naughty boy, but they loved him for it, and they laughed, and he had their back, and therefore they were willing to support him. It wasn't messianic then, but at the end, on January the 6th, on the ellipse, that patch of ground, parkland, beyond the south lawn of the White House, where Donald Trump addressed the crowd and said to people, our election has been stolen from us. We've got to fight like hell to save our country. I was there and I spoke to these people, and they were saying to me, not just that the election had been stolen, but that Joe Biden was a Marxist, that he was being paid for by the Chinese Communist Party. He was fully an agent of the Chinese state. And you just think, why do you believe this? Why should I believe you? You're fake news. Well, the Attorney General has said the election was fair. He's the deep state. Well, what about all the judges? They're the deep state, but they were appointed by Donald Trump. Don't believe it. That is where it gets scary. The casual lies or untruths that were told throughout his presidency, starting on day one with my crowd was bigger than Barack Obama's, they were, who cares? Inconsequential. But when you are talking about a pandemic and you're not telling the truth about the dangers, or you're mocking people for wearing face masks, or when I was at that famous briefing when Donald Trump started talking about, injecting disinfectant, and then ultimately when you say that the election was stolen, and people are too frightened to say to Donald Trump, that is not true, that is scary.
I mean, extraordinary, and, Philip Roth's Plot Against America, and, all of these kinds of things are all part of that. Let's keep plowing forward, if we may. I loved a lot about this book. My absolute favorite moment of analysis in it is when you talk about Donald Trump as the director of his own reality TV show. And, your life is in television. I only spent 5 years at the BBC. That was a long time ago. But in some ways, the role of the director is to be kind of just gently moving things behind the scenes, and that you shouldn't really be aware of the director, but the power is all there. The image that went through my mind is the Truman Show, that fantastic movie where at one point there's an interview with Christoph, the person who's seen it all and is structuring it all. That's a very powerful position. And then on the other hand, there is Trump, the bumbler, fringe literate, unable to construct a sentence with grammatical accuracy, not on top of figures, not on top of data. So, on the one hand, the master manipulator, on the other hand, the buffoon. Where do you stand on that? Who is Trump?
Trump is, it doesn't need me to say, you all know it. He's a very complicated individual, probably had a very unhappy childhood, feels he's got to, when Don Jr. was born and the mother said, I want to call him Don after you, Donald Trump was not flattered. What he said was, what happens if he's a loser? I don't want my son to be named after me if he's a loser. What an incredible thing to say. So Donald Trump alternately thinks that he is the greatest, that he is the most persecuted, that no one gets as bad a rap as he does, and people are so mean and horrid to him, and there's a lot of self-pity there. There is braggadocious behavior. I'm the cleverest, I'm the very stable genius. The things he has said and done, and he wants to be the center of every conversation. Now that has been, I think there is a great visceral sense of the mood of the American people. I have no difficulty explaining how Donald Trump won in 2016, and I have well, maybe a bit more difficulty, and no difficulty in explaining how well he did in 2020. Look, Donald Trump reads the pulse. Hillary Clinton had all these focus groups that were giving her qualitative research and quantitative research, and every message was sifted and drained so that she would get it, just exactly as the marketeers wanted it to. But she had no feel for the pulse of the American nation. Donald Trump did. And when he was appealing to people's darker angels, he was saying, we've got to keep Muslims out, we've got to tighten the borders, we've got to stop the Mexican rapists coming into our country, we've got to build a wall, we've got to bring back manufacturing and stop all those foreign countries nicking our jobs and taking our money. And it was a message that resonated. And to a large extent, in his first 4 years in office, he did pay down on all of those things. He did make it more difficult for Muslims to get into America. He did build a wall. He did stop the flow of refugees coming into the country. He brought back a bit of manufacturing. Had it not been for the pandemic, I think he would have won. And I don't think he lost because of the pandemic. I think he lost because of the way he handled the pandemic. And those are two very different things.
Fascinating, fascinating. Maybe we should do the thing that Trump doesn't want us to do, which is stop talking about him, and maybe I can, start talking about you a little. You talked a little bit about this at the beginning, but this is, it's a personal book, and you revealed a little about why it became that. It's been a very lonely year. I mean, I think all of us have experienced loneliness. You've experienced a loneliness with, beloved children in one continent and beloved wife on another continent, and you there kind of alone in America. And there's a very moving dinner party you go to in the garden, I think it's of the Irish ambassador, where you're sat at a table by yourself, with another couple of tables of people who are sitting around. What's it been like to be on your own in America at this time?
Well, look, I don't want to make it seem like poor me. Thank God I haven't lost a loved one to COVID. Thank God I haven't been sick, or none of my immediate family have been sick with COVID. So I kind of don't want to sort of lard this with any degree of self-pity, but I think every single person on this planet has had a tough year because of COVID, because of and for me, it has been a lonelier year than the one I would have imagined leading. And I now have since I was writing the book, and I say in one part of the book that, the big news, we were going to have a family Zoom, and the big news was my wife had got a waiver to come out to see me in America, and that was trumped by my son in Australia saying that his wife was pregnant. I now have a granddaughter who's 2 weeks old. I'm hoping that I will get to meet her before she does her A-levels, because at the moment, so that sort of hardship you have to write about, because it would have been a dishonest account. And I suspect that we've all become a little more reflective about the things that matter most to us in life over this past year. And I didn't really need reminding that my family was the thing that mattered most to me. And the dislocation from that and from loved ones and social isolation has been something that we've all had to wrestle with. I'm grateful to my late mother, who was an indomitable personality, but she, when I was a kid, she'd had polio as a child, so she was disabled. And she taught me how to cook and to clean. We all had to clean the house. My sister and I took it in turn, we had duties, and, so I could cook and I could clean and I could iron. And for the first time in, I have no idea how many years, I'm doing all of that in my little apartment in Washington, DC, because I had to. And there was, look, there were odd takeaways, but I just thought, right, I'm going to take this seriously. I'm going to try and stay well. So it was a different year, and it changed the way we covered the election. Although towards the end, we did get out and about quite a lot. So I did a bit of planes, trains, and automobiles of, being in Florida and being in Tennessee and being in Pennsylvania and Ohio and Michigan and all these places. So, I did travel as well. And it was,
I wonder, can we place this part of your book in that kind of journey? When I told my dad that I was interviewing you, and he kind of, told me how excited, the first thing he said is, "Oh, is he Jewish?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." And my dad, who has listened to, I think, every Americast for the last 15 years, had never heard you out yourself, as it were. And then I start reading the book, and then there's a Jewish joke here, and there's a Jewish joke there, and there's a bit of Yiddish here, and there's a bit of Yiddish there. And you come out of the book much more Jewishly than I would have kind of located you as being. Can you take us through that journey and perhaps locate that in this year of reflection and value reorientation?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because I'm the classic embodiment of the old Woody Allen joke that, are you a Jew? No, but I'm Jewish. And that's sort of who I am. I'm not that observant. There are times when I go to shul every now and then, something happens and I think I need to reconnect or recharge or whatever it happens to be. In a lot of ways, my parents were social workers in the East End of London. Post-war, I was born at the end of the 1950s. And they ran this huge community centre called the Oxford and St George's Club, which there was a shul in the basement. And so I grew up steeped in the Jewish community, I suppose. And so there is, and my father spoke Yiddish, and there are odd Yiddish phrases. I love the canon of Jewish humour. And there are so many great jokes because they're about character and about personality. So every now and then you come across something that happens and you think, actually, that just embodies the great Yiddish joke about this or that. So, because I take very seriously the BBC mission to educate, entertain, and inform. And, so I want to inform, and that's the cornerstone of my journalism. I want to educate a bit, but I also want to entertain. And if you can deal with very serious stuff and make people smile along the way, then maybe I don't believe you give people medicine and say, you're not going to enjoy this, but it's good for you. Open your mouth, in it goes. I want to kind of take the audience along with me. So yeah, that Jewishness maybe has come through. My sister read the manuscript for me. And she said, "Oh my God, when did all this, this Jewish culture come out of you?" Because, and maybe it was just being alone and, the time to think, and maybe there was a reconnection of some description.
Fascinating. We're just coming out of the celebration of Purim this last week, and I got to have a conversation with David Schneider, one of the great Jewish humorists of our age, and talking about the way that Jewish humor in particular is a way of dealing with power. It's a way of analyzing power and reframing power and sort of keeping up the strength of the little person as sort of matters beyond our sort of physical control, escape us. I think you and Emily do a terrific job on Americast. I think the reason why I just looked it up, right? It's the number 2 BBC podcast for adults. Part of that is, I think, undoubtedly due to the humor that both of you, the banter, the quality of that. But there's another piece to the sort of, the turn to the existential, if not precisely the turn to the Jewish that I'd like to just to get out. I'm presuming you've got your copy to hand.
I'm being very restrained. I'm not holding it up. I'm not
available in all good bookshops. But we talked about this section on page 94, and this is coming at a time when the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson becomes ill, and you take us through that sort of trickle of announcements. And again, I'm just remembering all of this, as you retell it to me, the announcement that he's ill, and then the move to hospital, and then the move into the ICU. Do you want to take me to just read the section on page 94?
By the way, I remember telling a friend's daughter what my job was. This is when I used to present with Emily Maitlis. And I said, I'm a journalist and I travel all the world and da-da-da. And so she goes, so you just read out loud? And I go, well, yeah, that's one description of my job. So anyway, let me have a go. So this is, the news had come through that Boris was being moved into intensive care, and about how the sort of glib reassurances of earlier had gone and how destabilized I felt by it. And it's evening, and Trump has said, I'm going to offer my best medical people. So I'm going to take it from there, just a paragraph before. I rang the desk in London to see if they wanted me to file overnight on what the president had said about the PM at his briefing. No, I was told by the overnight editor. They'd just run a clip of Trump speaking. But she was pleased that I'd rung, because one of the big cheeses had called saying I should be on standby overnight. Rumours were swirling in political circles that he was on a ventilator, and if he didn't make it through the night, they'd want a piece from me. This destabilizes me even more. I hate the lazy use of the word surreal to describe something that might be slightly out of the ordinary, but this all does feel surreal and actually quite upsetting. For the first time in the 2.5 weeks that I've been back in DC and living this life of isolation and social distancing, I feel really homesick, probably compounded by the sense of extreme vulnerability that I suspect we're all feeling right now. I was going to have a non-alcoholic Monday. Screw that. From my days at Westminster, I've interviewed Boris Johnson many times. I would not lay any claim to friendship, but he's infectiously, not a great word to use in the circumstances, good company. I remember being with him in Beijing at the Olympics in 2008. He was there as Mayor of London, the next city to host the Games. When he came to a news conference and started talking about table tennis as whiff-waff, and none of the translators had the faintest clue what he was on about. Whatever charisma is, Boris has got it. I thought as a politician he could be a rogue and opportunistic, not unique character flaws among elected representatives, or broadcasters for that matter, but he won the election decisively. He does seem to have a plan, whatever you may think of it, and he is our Prime Minister. Insofar as this lapsed, slightly agnostic Jew prays, I do pray that he gets through this quickly and can resume his position to guide the country through these terrible times.
Thank you for that passage. It's one of the very, I think there's such a range of voices that that I hear when you're reading the book, and that kind of tender one is perhaps the most moving. It's coming just before another very tender moment for you, which is the loss of Irene in your life. Do you want to just sort of just explain a little about that?
Yeah, so Irene Aitman was a social worker at the same youth club where my parents had been, at the Oxford and St George's Club in Henricus Street in Stepney, and sort of we grew up to the two families, the Aitman family and the Sopel family. Their kids intermingle and merged, and we all grew up together. And Irene, who was sort of my godmother figure insofar as Judaism has godmothers, she was like a second mother to me. She'd had the most unbelievably full life and had kind of went off bird watching in Mali when she was in her late 80s and was just formidable. Anyway, she died, and there was a Zoom funeral, which again I found very moving and very upsetting. And I salute all branches of Judaism, all faith leaders, for what they are trying to do to keep their communities together. And I was on a Zoom funeral, my first experience of this, and I found it beautiful and deeply moving and very upsetting. And because we'd been so close to the family, I was asked at the end whether I would like to say something about my own memory or reflection on Irene. And the funeral was at, I think, 10 o'clock in the morning in London, which is 5 o'clock in the morning in Washington. So I had set my alarm at 4:45. I'd sat up in bed. I realize as I am speaking that I am at a funeral in my pajamas and speaking out loud. And I think this is like those anxiety dreams that I'll probably have one tonight, having spoken about this out loud, of, you know, going to school naked or doing something, or in the studio trying to read the news when you haven't got any scripts in front of you and you're trying to make up what the stories are about and it's all a jumble. And it was just like, I am now living an anxiety dream. And so amidst the tears afterwards that I shed for Irene, I also roared with laughter because I thought she would love the story, and her kids would love the story, and it would just amuse everybody. And I kind of think that's the year we've had.
You know, may her memory be a blessing, and I'm sorry for your loss, and to all her family. She's fortunate to have such an eloquent eulogizer, I'm sure. But let's move back away from the personal, and let's ask some questions about about where we are now. Interesting day. Trump has emerged from the golf course with his swing 20 yards longer, we're told, to give his first kind of, you know, political speech since inauguration. Where are we?
Well, you know, Donald Trump is gone, but he's not gone away. And I think that his ego will demand that he remains the center of conversation. Does he run again in 2024? It's a long way away. And he's got a lot of legal difficulties. The New York Attorney General now has the details of his tax returns and seems to be building some kind of criminal case, which we will see how that develops. The authorities in Georgia are looking at a criminal case as well over election interference, when Donald Trump made that telephone call to the Secretary of State and asked him to find him an extra 11,780 votes. That was just 3 days before the riots that we saw at Capitol Hill. You know, if you believe that in politics, which I tend to have a certain sympathy for, that you are only ever remembered for one thing, I think Donald Trump will be remembered for January the 6th and what took place in Congress and the attempt to subvert American democracy. So I don't think, it's far from clear that Donald Trump comes back, but he has a grip on the Republican Party. He follows Machiavelli's maxim that it is better to be feared than loved. And the Republican congressmen and women are terrified of him. They are terrified because, one, he has got stacks of money that he has raised as a result of this legal battle, but he's got a lot of big time backers who will come in. And anyone who goes against him and says he should be impeached or he should be prosecuted or he should be banned, they will be primaried. It'll be like you're the MP of the constituency for wherever, and you suddenly find from within your own party, you've got someone challenging you who has got a shed load of money, has got the backing of Trump, and you suddenly find your political career ended. And so Donald Trump wants to make sure that even if he's not running in 2024, the party remains the party of Trump. Now, I think there are very big dangers for the Republican Party if it goes down that route, because you look at what happened in 2020, centrist Republicans, independents, a lot of women, a lot of white men didn't vote for the Republican Party. They voted against Trump. They just thought enough is enough. I've been sitting in the car with heavy metal playing for the past hour at volume 11. I want some easy listening jazz with the volume at 6. And Joe Biden provided easy listening jazz. And I think that but here's the danger for the Republican Party at the moment. If it's not Trump, what brings the millions of Trump-like supporters out to vote? Trump got a kicking in the midterm elections in November, 2 years ago, when he wasn't on the ballot. So I think that, it's far from clear that Donald Trump having this massive influence will be beneficial to the Republican Party, but it's how they break away from it. I'm sure that the majority of people in Congress would like to see Donald Trump disappear into the background and into the distance. He ain't going to do that.
Let's touch on the less the character who's less likely to boost ratings, who appears in the book, Joe Biden. This is, from page 14 of your book. Joe Biden just seems like an old boxer who's got back into the ring for one last payday, even though his management and trainers know in their hearts it's a lousy idea. He seems off the pace, a bit forgetful. He's certainly not floating like a butterfly, nor stinging like a bee. Punch drunk. I mean, you do say maybe I'm being unfair, but this is the man who's now the president of the United States. Where does that leave us?
And Rabbi, honestly, the thing that I came to, the conclusion I reached at the end was that no one else in that field, in the Democratic field, could have beaten Donald Trump. Joe Biden was the perfect candidate. And you asked me what's Donald Trump like, and I talked about his visceral sense of where the mood is. He has a visceral sense of danger as well. That's why he has survived as long as he has survived. And he recognized a year and a bit ago that Biden was the biggest threat to him. And that's why he led to his first impeachment, when he sent Rudy Giuliani off on this mission to Ukraine to investigate some company we've never heard of, about some energy company that Biden's son had been a director of, and led to that call with Volodymyr Zelensky, a president that also none of us had heard of. And so I think that Biden was the perfect candidate at that time. Yeah, he is a bit slow, but he also was very effective. And the other thing, the pandemic worked to Biden's advantage massively, because if it had been a normal political campaign and it was who's getting the bigger crowds at their rallies and who's firing up their base the most, it wouldn't be Joe Biden, it would be Trump. And what you had in this election, this unique feature, I think, of 2020, will be this thing called negative partisanship, that it wasn't what people wanted most. What people wanted most was Donald Trump. I love Donald Trump. If it was just about loving Donald Trump would have won. The antipathy towards Donald Trump was what drove so many people to vote for Joe Biden, even though they don't think of him as the most gifted, able, brilliant orator of his age. They do recognize that he's 78 years old. He is older on day one. He was older on day one of taking office than Ronald Reagan was when he left after 2 terms. And we all thought Ronald Reagan was a little bit past it. So, but in this moment of history, and with Kamala Harris, who making history as well, and that we shouldn't overlook the significance of that moment, that the first woman vice president, the first person of color to be vice president. These are big things, and so far Biden does seem to be lowering the temperature a bit in America, which is what probably American democracy needs, if it isn't so great for journalists like me who like being on the television every night.
We're coming to the end of our time together. I was going to go for one question about where does it leave the Middle East. We'll have to perhaps, John, have you back to have your reflections on that. Maybe it's a little early in Biden's presidency to be asking that question. But I want to just thank you enormously for giving of your time today. One of the things that comes across reading the book is that you're a busy man. Your sleep schedule in particular is, I think, utterly extraordinary. But this is it. John Sopel's Unprecedented. I recommend it enormously. I'll leave a last word to you, John. Any parting thoughts for us?
No, listen, it's been a great pleasure talking to you. It's been the privilege of a lifetime to be reporting on something as dysfunctional, discordant, exhausting, exhilarating, you name it. Thank you very much for having me.
All the best. Thank you all so much. Our day at Masorti Together continues. You're warmly welcomed to head back into the main room at this point, and then there'll be a further series of breakouts with some excellent sessions later on in the day. John, thank you so much. Thank you, Charlotte, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Great pleasure. Thank you so much.